Hi, I'm Meredith Bell, President of Performance Support Systems, and today I'm very excited to be interviewing Liz Lajoie about her very special book, From Zero to Zen. Liz is the Coach's CFO and the founder of Statera Business Solutions. She helps women coaches and creative professionals master their finances so they can grow an amazing business with confidence. She does that by teaching her clients to use systems and programs that can streamline their financial activities and use their own numbers to learn small business financial management strategies. Liz sees herself as a financial guide, and I have to say, in her new book, I think she fills that role beautifully. So, Liz, I'm very excited to have you with us.
Me too. Thanks. That was a lovely introduction. I'm excited to be here.
Well, great. The first thing I want to do is ask you to tell us a little bit about the work you've done over the years so we understand how you came up with the material in your book and also how you came up with that very interesting title, From Zero to Zen.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my background is in small business management for professional service providers. I spent about a decade as a business manager for a local engineering firm, and it was a great opportunity for me to really learn the nitty-gritty of how to do business as people who sell our brains for a living, right? We don't have businesses where many of us don't have businesses where we make widgets or a storefront. There's a very particular kind of financial management associated with that. And it was a really great opportunity. I got my MBA paid for. I was brought into leadership and ownership and successfully transitioned the company from the founder to a new series of owners. And we opened satellite offices and did all kinds of great stuff. And I got a lot of great learning opportunity out of that. And that was the catalyst for me to be able to turn around and start working with people in the online environment in a slightly different way. Part of my story involves, and some people know this, is that I am recovering now very well from chronic Lyme disease, and that part of the process of finally getting a diagnosis after many years of not being diagnosed and realizing I needed to make some personal changes in my life to better find a balance and take care of my health, allowed me to move into this more online environment and started working with coaches and creatives and people who are, really getting going with their entrepreneurial story and start working with this new demographic of people, which is really exciting for me because it turns out that I have this ability to explain this very nitty-gritty, gnarly topic for a lot of people in their businesses in a way that isn't super overwhelming and super scary. So the title of my book, From Zero to Zen, really is, this book is for people who traditionally are pretty numbers averse. And the concept is that with some very little bit of easy learning, you really can take this part that maybe you've been hiding from a little bit or aren't feeling great about and put some things in place to make you feel really way better about what's happening with that part of your business and really learn how to step into this role as a business owner. For a lot of people who don't necessarily even consider themselves business owners, a lot of my clients are really dedicated to serving their clients and doing good work in the world. And this whole idea of being an entrepreneur or having a business or having this kind of managerial ticky-tacky stuff to take care of is kind of deer in headlights. And so I walk them through a process that helps alleviate a lot of that anxiety and get them realizing and how to use their numbers in a way that's useful for them so that they can grow.
That's great. I really loved your book and the way you laid everything out. It's so logical and reassuring. And it's why I used the word guide in your introduction, because I really see you as somebody that's kind of holding their hand, walking them through this, not just throwing out, some academic instructions and saying, go forth and do it. You're really helping them throughout the process. And one of the other things I loved was that you really started with, I think, is the most important area, which is their attitude about money and also their emotional relationship to it. And so I'm curious to know, why is it that you feel that it was so important to start with?
When I started working with this particular type of client, it became really apparent early on that I can teach until the cows come home about details and how-tos and all that kind of stuff. But the conversation really was never about that. The conversation was all about the headspace that people were in and feeling really uncomfortable. And, we all come to our businesses with some form of financial baggage or another, whether it's, a limiting belief that we grew up with about how we're not meant to earn money, or maybe it's, just I don't like that kind of work. It's not, that's not part of my DNA makeup, whatever it might be. And talking about that early on in the book was really important for me to remind my readers that we all have stories and we all have discomforts of one variety or another, myself included, and recognizing them and trying to work through them is part of the process of becoming really successful with your money management. We can check the boxes and we can do the work, but it's way more meaningful if we're recognizing our emotional state around it.
Mm-hmm. I just think that's so great. And I especially love the exercise that you had one of your clients do at the end of the day. So I'd love for you to tell our listeners about that, because I think it's something they could do too, and it could make such a difference.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is that client actually brought that exercise to me. She mentioned it. She told me about it. And so I use it with clients now. The idea is it's very simple, right? There are a couple of simple things we can do to start thinking about money a little bit more consciously in our lives. And so this exercise that you're referring to involves, like, at the end of the day, just taking a few minutes and thinking to yourself, what good has money or finances brought into my life today? Because we so often think very, very negatively about it, whether it's people aren't paying me fast enough, or I'm constantly having to juggle money and transfer from one account to the other and make ends meet, or I just don't want to do this work that's required as a business owner. But there's a lot of good that happens with money too. It's just a tool, right? Money in my life allows me or you or anybody to, pay our mortgage and put gas in our cars. And, it's a tool that we can use. And if we can start thinking about the positive pieces of it, as well as the stuff we don't like, it can really do a nice little mental shift for us. The other thing that I do with clients is another little exercise that might be useful for your listeners is just take a week and kind of just notice how money's moving in and out of your life. It's a piece that we don't often look at, right? Our statement comes in the door and we shove it under the phone book. Well, nobody has phone books anymore, but right, we put it at the bottom of the stack and we don't want to look at it. We don't want to open it. And eventually we burn it or shred it or whatever. If we're paying a little bit more attention of when am I spending, what's coming in, it starts to get you in the habit of recognizing what's actually happening. And for most of my clients, when we do that exercise, they have a big relief out of it because they realize that it's not as bad as they had been imagining it was when they were ignoring it or putting their head in the sand about it.
Yeah, that whole thing of being willing to face the reality.
Right.
And I think what you're saying with that question in particular, what good things happen, is the importance of balance. So you recognize and acknowledge the positive things that happen. Mm-hmm. And so you don't focus on having enough or, I just think that's so important, because I think a source of our stress and worry is because of what we do focus our attention on. So your advice to ask that question at the end of the day about what good things have happened, but also the noticing and paying attention. Do you recommend that people write down what they notice, or what's the strategy there during
when I do that initially? It's usually when I start working with clients and I don't want it to be too overwhelming, so I ask them actually not to take notes about it. But you can do whatever feels good to you. That's the other piece about financial management that many of us get hung up about, is that we think that we're afraid we're going to do it wrong, right? And the reality is there's very little that, one, can't be fixed, at least in your bookkeeping, right? And two, like there's a little bit of ebb and flow, right? There's probably 5 different ways to do any particular task goal that you have, right? So if writing it down is helpful, write it down. If it feels overwhelming, like it's a should, and you have to oh God, now I got to go to my notebook and write down positive things, like that's not helpful, right? So I like to let people flow with that in the way that works for them.
That's great. I think that's really good advice. There were so many things you had in your book. It's hard to zero in on just a few, but one that I think is particularly relevant for folks who are in these service professions that you work with, like coaches and the creatives. You talked about contracts in chapter 4, and I wanted you to address a little bit about why you feel it's so important for service professionals to have contracts in place or written agreements before starting any work with a client.
Well, this is a really great place to develop an awesome client relationship. And we don't often think about contract, like we're just like, major legalese, heavy, all this kind of stuff. But it's actually, if we can turn that concept on its head and think about it as a great communication tool for our clients, we can end up doing so much more with it. It doesn't have to be heavy. It doesn't have to be crazy. But the things that you get when you have an actual written contract are, one, protections for you, but also protections for your client, right? You are being very specific about what you're going to do, and you can develop a further understanding between the two of you about what the relationship is going to look like. You have some checks and balances in place, but it's also a really nice way to show your client that you are a professional. You're worth spending money on and spending time with. If we're just doing it as yep, I'm going to work with you, Meredith, and, give me your credit card number. You don't know if I climbed out of a hole yesterday and I have maybe I talk a good game and I'm not really real. A contract gives you an extra layer of, professionalism and validity, I think. And then it also does all those great things in terms of the protection piece of it and the client communication piece of it. Because if you're really specific in your contract about how you're going to get paid, what happens if, you're taking their credit card and the credit card bounces, or, it's who's responsible for making sure that A, B, and C happen in your working relationship. It makes it that much easier to have those conversations later on when this stuff comes up than if you're trying to kind of just manufacture it on the fly halfway through the relationship and it gets garbled and maybe they hear one thing and you meant to say something else. The document as a referral tool is really helpful that way too.
Mm-hmm. I would think it also increases the commitment of both parties to the relationship.
Absolutely. So a lot of us, right, if you're a professional service provider, I think it's pretty standard. Most people expect a contract. Most people are thinking about using them. There are lots of templates out there. There are lots of people who support those kind of people, those sorts of service providers, with the language to use, and the clients kind of expect it. The people that I work with, it's a little bit looser than that. And so when I work with my clients, I tend to bring this in as a piece of the puzzle that, we can write this in a way that isn't completely overwhelming. And we can write this in a way that really makes this added benefit for your client, like you said, to really formalize the relationship in a non-scary, non-overwhelming kind of way.
Can you think of a specific client that you've worked with where you've had them put this in place, maybe they didn't have it before, and what has happened to improve their business as a result of now having these kinds of agreements?
So where this stuff comes up tends to be in, you get paid quicker. So I had a client who was often doing verbal agreements, and it meant she was chasing people down for money a lot because she wasn't really clear on when they owed her money, how she was going to get paid, right? And so once we set up a contract and really talked through her contract to cash cycle and streamline that, it became way easier. She wasn't spending all this time in her business messing around with chasing down money, which is the worst thing in the world to do as a business owner. And it brings up all these negative sort of interactions with your clients too, right? Like everybody's having this hard conversation. So now it's really clear up front. Clients know when they need to pay her. She's streamlined how she gets paid. So she's taken the responsibility of, like, she used to send invoices through PayPal, and it would sit on their agenda to click it and pay it and right. And then she would have to wait. So now she does it a little bit differently. She takes their credit card, she sets it up so that she has it on a recurring payment. She does it once, she doesn't have to think about it again. The client doesn't have to think about it again, so they can just focus on the good work they're doing together. And she's consistently getting paid, and she spends zero time chasing people for money. And that all started with a clean and clear contract.
Perfect. Oh, I love that example because really the other thing that we need to think about in this whole context of dealing with the money side of the business is creating what you call the systems and processes that really do streamline everything so that they can spend their time doing the things they love to do, which is working directly with the client to help them in these areas. So
This is why we got into business.
yeah, I just love that example. And another thing, you had lots of good examples and suggestions on the managing the expense side of the business. And in particular, you covered record keeping and spending habits. So could you share a few of your tips there? Because I think those are also very relevant to our listeners.
So most of us these days, right? So as a business, we're required to keep accurate documentation of our income coming in and our expenses going out. So for most of us, we know we need to keep receipts, but we don't really know what that means, right? We think like, okay, well, so where do I keep them? How do I keep them? What does that all look like? And the cool thing is in today's world, well, first of all, in today's world, we have like 10% of our stuff is maybe still paper, and the other 90% is some weird amalgamation of emails, Amazon receipts that we have to download, and who knows what, right? Like we're getting it in all these different formats. And it can make the record keeping part of it seem kind of crazy. So the cool thing though is that these days there's all kinds of neat programs that can help us streamline that part of it and get all of that information into one place. So I like to think of it as the electronic version of the old file cabinet, right? We used to have file cabinets with different file folders for different vendors or people that we paid to keep track of what we've bought in our business and how that part of the money is flowing. And there are many ways to make this a nice, seamless, easy electronic version where you can scan in that 10% of paper receipt into it. You can pull in all of your various versions of electronic into one place and tag them nicely so that you have your records management in a really easy to use, seamless way, so that if you have to go back and find them because you have an audit or somebody asked a question or you needed to answer a question you had about your finances, it's all right there. And that's a piece that a lot of us, like, we throw it in a shoebox and then we bring it to our accountant at the end of the year maybe. One of the main things that I do with my clients is work with them to develop a schedule for their bookkeeping so that they're doing things more often and more regularly, so that you don't have to spend 2 days or 2 weeks tearing your hair out at tax season trying to pull out this information together.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's put it in a system that you're using consistently, 15 minutes, half an hour a week to, bring it all together, know what you're doing with it so that you're not having to spend that time on the back end. It's all nice and tidy as you go along. The added benefit for having all of your documentation that way is that you can then to really start at any point throughout the year and know exactly where you stand financially. It's not a big question mark.
That's so helpful. And the other, this whole thing of bookkeeping, which you were just mentioning, you really lay it out so logically and simply, very specifically, what to do on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual basis. So what I was thinking about is for people who tend to be averse about the money part of this, what are some of the things you recommend so they don't feel overwhelmed by all of these steps when they're looking at them?
This is the big question. This is the big question for all of us, right? And when I start working with clients, this is usually their biggest concern, actually, of like, am I going to open up this huge can of worms for all this extra work that I'm stressed out about doing? What does this really look like? And my answer to them generally is, we can line item out what you need to be doing and when, so that you're not worrying if you're missing something. Because that's really, it comes back to the mindset stuff, right? If we can take all of this question mark that's floating around your head and feeling like it's super heavy and turn it into, oh, I know that on a weekly basis, I need to book and process invoices, and I need to record what I've paid, and that's all I really need to do on a weekly basis. Awesome. 15 minutes, done. Right? On a monthly basis, I need to reconcile my bank statements, and then I can look at my reports and know exactly where I stand. Awesome. Done. Right? So it seems kind of overwhelming, but thank you for that intro about how I line that out in the book, because I wanted that to be that message. Really, the main message is this doesn't have to be hard. It really can be as easy as 15 minutes a week.
And I think that's one of the key things I loved about your book is that you do keep it very simple and it's very conversational. You know, it's like a one-on-one conversation you're having with someone. And so for folks who are in these helping professions or service professionals, I just think your book is a tremendous gift for them because most of them don't have that kind of background. And so anytime we have something that is an unknown to us, you know, it's sort of like the big scary boogeyman. If we don't know what it is and we have trouble defining it, our fears and our anxieties can increase. And I think one of the real things you've done with your book is you've stripped away the mystery, you know, the unknowns, and you've just laid it out in a very simple and easy to follow format. So I think that, you know, you've introduced a really important book to folks that maybe have been intimidated by this. And I'm just curious, are there any other tips that I haven't asked you about that you want to share before we talk about how people can find you and your book?
Yeah. I think the main one is start looking, right? Just start looking a little bit regularly at what's happening. That's really the biggest hurdle for a lot of people. And once you start get comfortable with that and be like, oh, this is just part of what I do on a daily basis or a weekly basis, that in and of itself is sort of the key to unlocking moving past the discomfort, right? Because it's, oh, I'm the business person, and allows you to step into being the business person who looks at her finances and can take control of them instead of having them and the fear run her around. I think that's really the biggest takeaway that I like to leave people with is just look at it, right? Numbers and money, there's no judgment there. It just is, right? It's a tool. It's data. It's not going to sneak up and like throttle you in the middle of the night. That's all this stuff. Like our brain is the one who thinks that has meaning. But the reality is when you strip that piece away and you just look at it and get comfortable looking at it, the rest kind of falls into place.
Mm-hmm. And then it's just a matter of blocking the time. Just like you block appointments with a client, you block the time on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to attend to those specific tasks.
Yeah, exactly.
So Liz, where can people get a copy of From Zero to Zen, and how can they connect with you?
Great question. You can go to the same place for both of those things. If you go to FromZeroToZenBook.com, you can download a free copy. You can also go to Amazon if you happen to want to pay money for it and take it down onto your Kindle. You can do that too. But you can grab it for free there. Again, that's FromZeroToZenBook.com. And then there's also my contact information there, but I'll also say it really quickly if you want to shoot me an email. My email is liz@coachescfo.com. So COACHES CFO.com. And I'm always happy to link with people on LinkedIn or Facebook, whatever social media platform that works for you. I've always got conversations happening there. So there might be some additional training or learning information that's useful for you. I love to talk about this stuff. So yeah.
I know. I love your passion about it from our earlier conversations, and you are just a wealth of knowledge and information. So I really encourage everyone to go download your book since you're making it available at no charge. And Liz is a terrific guide if you want to work with her as well once you've read her book. There are so many areas that she can be of assistance in helping you with your business. So thank you, Liz. It's been a pleasure talking to you about your book, and I'll look forward to staying in touch and hearing more success stories from your clients.
Thank you, Meredith. This has been great.